So that would be an example of what I mean by listening to your life, and it would be an example of the best advice I can give you. If anybody wants to start listening in a new way, keep track of those moments when something brings those tears to your eyes. To give you another kind of example of the same thing, I wanted to read you another entry in this book, taking another word just as humdrum as the word tears, and I should say that very often it's the most humdrum moments that turn out to be the most eloquent moments. Maybe because they catch you off guard. You're not all keyed up to understand some particular big thing, but you're just sort of open to whatever happens. Again, my wife, and in this case all three of our children, took a trip once to the West Coast, and one of the things that my wife especially wanted to see, because she's very much into that kind of natural beauty, was the giant redwood forest. And as far as I was concerned, I was bored stiff with the idea. I thought, who wants to go see another tree? But off we went, the four of us and some friends, into the giant redwoods there in Northern California, and I wanted to read you this little entry. I remember seeing a forest of giant redwoods for the first time. The entry, I should say, is awe, A-W-E. There were some small children nearby, giggling and chattering and pushing each other around. Nobody had to tell them to be quiet as we entered. They quieted down all by themselves. Everybody did. You couldn't hear a sound of any kind. It was like coming into a vast, empty room. 200 or 300 feet high, the redwoods stood. You had to crane your neck back as far as it would go to see the tops of the trees. They made their own twilight out of the bright California day. There was a stillness and a stateliness about them that seemed to become part of you as you stood there, stunned by the sight of them, really. They'd been growing in that place for going on 2,000 years. With infinite care, they were growing even now. You could feel them doing it. They made you realize that all your life you'd been mistaken. Oaks and ashes, maples and chestnuts and elms you'd seen for as long as you could remember. But never until this moment had you so much as dreamed what a tree really was. Behold the man, Pontius Pilate said when he led Jesus out where everybody could see him. He can't have been much to look at after what they'd done to him even by then. But my guess is that even so, there suddenly fell over that mob a silence as awed as ours in the forest, when for the first time in their lives they found themselves looking at a human being. You have to be quiet. You have to be quiet to hear as those great trees enforce you almost to be quiet. Anything you would say in their presence becomes the chatter of a cricket. And how hard it is to be quiet, especially verbal people like me, just to stop. Not only the outward talking, but also the internal talking, the way we all of us are always in some sort of endless, haggard dialogue with ourselves, which makes me think of what I can say after many years of teaching school at one place or another, beginning way back, my first job, and from time to time ever since. The greatest class I ever taught was a class when I was teaching at a boys' prep school, boys then in New Hampshire. It was an afternoon, late afternoon class, and I remember driving back from the beach where I'd been to whiff the sea air for a minute to that class, and as I drove towards town, towards the west, away from the ocean, I noticed that the sun was just beginning to show signs of setting, sort of lemony color in the sky. And then I went up to the classroom, and there were the 15 or so boys gathered around the table waiting for whatever was going to happen. And we waited, and I could see the yellow beginning to deepen a little bit, the sun sinking a little bit. And then the bell rang, and normally speaking, I would have gotten up and started off with a lesson for the day. But with this marvelously happy impulse, never thought out. Instead of starting out the class, I flipped the light switch off, which meant that we were suddenly sitting in deep dusk with the sun setting through the window. The room faced west. And it was a magnificent sunset. I can still see it. It was a very orange, sort of pumpkin-colored sunset with the branches of the trees and the corners of the buildings black as soot against it. And it turned from orange to crimson and so on. We sat there in absolute silence. That was the curious thing. You'd have thought in a room full of 15 boys somebody would have horse-laughed or poked the other in the ribs or giggled or something like that, but not at all. We sat there for as long as it took the sun to set, without a word, without anything, any sound at all, until finally the sun did set and we were sitting there in darkness. And I've thought since what made that such a marvelous class. The sunset was almost the least of it. I'm not saying something sentimental about sunsets. The sunset was marvelous. A lot of it was the silence, which we find, I think, in this world so awkward. We're embarrassed, we're afraid of silence because we use words so often not to reveal who we are, but to conceal who we are. We hide behind our chatter, and in silence there's a kind of sense of being stripped naked, but perhaps because we couldn't see our faces, perhaps because it was a special kind of silence we were all contributing to in a way. It was not an awkward silence, it was a sort of blessed silence. Silence was part of it. The sense of each other's presence was part of it. We were all there together, all participating in this silence. The wonderful sense that nothing had to be done about it. No test was going to be given, no questions were going to be asked, nothing like that. Just to be there and see what there was to be seen made it a deeply moving thing. And the sense also that we were seeing not just the sun set gorgeously, never has done it better, but we were seeing a day of our lives come to an end. Without sadness, with a kind of lovely gentleness. We only got so many days, and here was one of them. It was beautifully ending. Then I remember after the class was over, before I listened, well, it got dark. The sunset was over, and I thought to myself, this is a religion class, I'm a religious teacher, perhaps now I should make some edifying remark about the sunset and draw some religious conclusion from it. And by an impulse as happy as the one which led me to turn off the light, I said not a word, thank heavens, except go home, and home they went. And it was for that reason, it was a very good class. So that is another illustration of what I'm talking about, the listening to your life. And since I have this book before me as a way of beguiling you in the few moments we have left, I thought I'd read you another one or two entries. And perhaps one I'll read you, and that is the word dying. We all think about that from time to time. I don't mean death. That's another issue, death and what may come after it, if anything. But I'm thinking of dying, the moment itself of withdrawal from this world and the transition into whatever may lie beyond it. And again, I'm talking here less in theological terms and in terms of an image which is very real to me. And this is it.